Snow fell heavily as the old woman opened her cabin door. On the porch, two tiny German shepherds sat shivering, icicles frozen to their fur. Her heart ached, and she carried them inside. But she had no idea. By the next morning, police cars would surround her home. An old woman wrapped herself in a heavy coat, listening to the howling wind batter against the wooden walls. Winter nights were always lonely, but this one felt especially cruel, the kind of cold that seemed to seep into the bones. She moved slowly from room to room, her hands rough from years of work, her eyes tired but still gentle. Outside, the snow piled higher, burying the path to the nearest town. She had grown used to the silence, to the emptiness that came with age and isolation. But that night, silence was broken. Faintly, beneath the howl of the storm, came a sound she hadn't heard in years, a soft whimper, fragile and desperate, carried by the wind. She froze, straining her ears. Someone, or something, was at her door. The old woman pulled her shawl tighter and shuffled toward the door, her heart uneasy. The whimpering grew louder, a pitiful cry against the storm. With trembling hands, she unlatched the door and pushed it open, her breath caught. There, on the wooden porch, sat two German shepherd puppies. Their fur was soaked with melting snow. Icicles clung to their whiskers, and their tiny bodies shook with violent shivers. Their eyes, wide, pleading, and filled with exhaustion, looked straight at her, as if begging for mercy. The woman gasped, bending down despite the icy wind that bit at her cheeks. She touched one, and it whimpered softly, leaning into her hand as though it had finally found safety. The second puppy tried to stand but stumbled, too weak to stay on its paws. Her heart ached. They were freezing, fragile, and moments away from giving up. Without a second thought, she scooped them into her arms, feeling their cold little bodies press against her chest. "Come inside, babies," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "You're safe now." She shut the door firmly against the storm, not realizing that this single act of kindness would change her life by morning. Inside the cabin, the storm still roared against the walls, but the puppies no longer shivered in the snow. The old woman hurried to the fireplace, laying them gently on a thick wool blanket. Their tiny bodies curled close together, eyes half closed, as if the heat was the first comfort they had felt in days. At first, they were too weak to move, but soon their noses twitched, and they began lapping hungrily, tails trembling with faint energy. Watching them eat brought tears to her eyes. She had lived through years of loneliness, yet in that moment, her home felt alive again. The puppies, now full and drowsy, crawled closer until one rested its head on her knee. The other sighed deeply, drifting into sleep. The old woman smiled through tears. For years she had thought she had nothing left to give. Yet here, in her small cabin, two fragile lives had found warmth, safety, and love. Little did she know, this act of kindness would bring unexpected visitors the very next morning. The cabin was quiet except for the steady crackle of the fire. The old woman had settled into her chair, drifting in and out of sleep, when sudden barking jolted her awake. The puppies, who had been curled peacefully at her feet, now stood alert, their ears pricked, eyes fixed on the door. She frowned. "What is it, little ones?" she whispered, rising slowly. But the pups didn't move toward her. They stayed rooted to the spot, growling low, their gaze never leaving the door. Outside, the storm had calmed. No footsteps, no sounds of wildlife, only the eerie silence of deep snow. Yet the puppies acted as if something, or someone, was out there. One padded to the window, scratching lightly at the frost, while the other barked again, sharp and urgent. The old woman's heart quickened. These weren't the actions of lost strays, simply afraid of the dark. They seemed trained, watchful, almost on duty. She placed a hand on the door, hesitated, then withdrew. Something about their intensity told her to wait. The night passed slowly, their alert cries echoing through the cabin. She didn't know it yet, but their strange behavior was a warning. By morning, the answer would come, and it would arrive in the form of flashing police lights. The old woman stirred from her chair, stiff from the night. At her feet, the puppies lifted their heads, ears twitching, as if they knew something was coming. Then came the sound, heavy footsteps crunching against the snow, followed by voices shouting commands. The old woman froze. Through the window, She saw a sight she hadn't expected in 100 years of winters. Police cars lined up outside her cabin, red and blue lights cutting through the quiet morning. Her heart pounded as she shuffled to the door. Before she could open it, loud knocks rattled the wood. "Ma'am, this is the police. Please open the door." Trembling, she pulled the latch. The door swung wide, and there they stood, an entire squad of officers, their faces sharp with urgency. Their eyes immediately darted past her, landing on the two German Shepherd puppies sitting obediently by the fire, relief and tension mixed in their expressions. One officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, those aren't just puppies. They're part of a police K-9 training unit. They disappeared yesterday during a mission." The old woman gasped, her hand flying to her chest. She had thought she had rescued lost strays, but now she realized she had been sheltering something far greater. And the police weren't just here for dogs. They were here for heroes. The officers stepped inside, brushing snow from their uniforms, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. The old woman clutched the edge of a chair for balance as one of them knelt beside the puppies. The little dogs wagged their tails, licking his hands as if greeting an old friend. "These aren't ordinary strays," the officer explained gently. "They're German Shepherds from our K-9 training program. Yesterday, during a field exercise, they were separated from the team in the storm. We searched all night. They're highly valuable, not just to us, but to the future of the police force." The old woman blinked, stunned. She had thought she was saving two fragile, abandoned souls. Instead, she had sheltered dogs destined to become protectors of an entire community. And yet, as the puppies leaned against her legs, reluctant to leave, she realized something else. They weren't just protectors. To her, they had already become family. The old woman sank slowly into her chair, her wrinkled hands trembling as she stroked the puppy's soft fur. They pressed against her, whining softly, unwilling to leave her side. For one fleeting night, they had been hers, her companions in the storm, her reason to smile again. The lead officer cleared his throat, his voice gentler now. "Ma'am, you saved them. Without you, they might not have survived the night. They'll go on to serve as K-9s. But today, they were just two freezing lives you brought back from the edge." Her eyes welled with tears. She nodded, whispering, "They saved me too." The room fell silent as the words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The officers exchanged looks, touched by her devotion. And though duty meant the puppies had to leave, their bond with the old woman was undeniable, one that neither storm nor distance could ever erase. The officers prepared to leave, gently guiding the puppies toward the door. But the little dogs resisted, their paws digging into the rug as they whined and looked back at the old woman. She knelt, pulling them close one last time. Their tiny tongues brushed her wrinkled hands, their tails wagging with reluctant joy. "Be brave," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The world needs you now." The officers stood silently, giving her a moment. Finally, with soft encouragement, the puppies trotted into the snow, their small frames dwarfed by the tall men in uniform. Yet, even as they walked away, they turned their heads again and again, as if making sure she was still there. The old woman remained in the doorway, tears glistening on her cheeks, but her heart swelled with pride. She had thought she was saving two lives, but in truth, they had saved her from the silence of loneliness. One officer paused before leaving. "Ma'am, once their training is complete, you'll always be welcome to visit them. After all, you're part of their story now." She smiled faintly, her hand pressed to her chest. The storm had taken much from her life, but that night it had given her something unforgettable, the reminder that kindness can ripple far beyond what we imagine.